Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I rise today to discuss a matter that transcends party lines and goes to the very heart of what makes America's military the most trusted institution in our country. I speak from a lifetime of devotion to the Army and our armed services. I joined the Army at 17 when I took the oath to defend and protect the Constitution as a new cadet at West Point. I served 12 years on active duty. I earned my Ranger tab and my senior jump wings. I had the privilege of commanding an infantry company in the 82nd Airborne Division. I taught at West Point, but I want to make it clear I am not a combat veteran. I have spent, in addition, nearly 3 decades on the Senate Armed Services Committee with the great privilege of serving both as ranking member and chairman. My connection to the military is neither transient nor incidental. That is precisely why I must speak out today about what President Trump is doing to our armed forces. He is attempting to politicize an institution that has remained steadfastly apolitical for nearly 250 years. He is disrespecting the professionalism and sacrifice of our service members. And if we in Congress do not reject his actions, and very soon, the damage could take generations to repair. America's apolitical military was constructed deliberately by leaders who understood that republics die when generals and soldiers become political pawns or political powers. George Washington set the standard. When he resigned his commission in 1783, he established the principle that military leaders serve the nation, not a party or a president or anything else. He made clear that military leadership is not a pathway to personal political power. Washington could have made himself king. He refused. And in that refusal, created the tradition we inherit today. The founders enshrined a non-political military in our Constitution, giving Congress, not the president, the sole power to raise armies, establish laws governing the military, and importantly, to declare war. The founders built checks and balances precisely to prevent the situation we now face. A president who views the military as his personal political instrument. This tradition is maintained in the United States through deliberate policy. The Uniform Code of Military Justice prohibits active duty personnel from partisan political activities. Military bases do not host campaign rallies. Service members do not appear in uniform at political events. Indeed, the Supreme Court itself has affirmed this principle. In the case of Greer v. Spock in 1976, the court upheld military regulations strictly prohibiting partisan political activity on military bases. The court's conclusion was unequivocal. The majority opinion explained that the military has a special responsibility to avoid, I quote, both the reality and the appearance of acting as handmaiden for partisan political causes or candidates. Justice Powell went on to warn that, quote, it is the lesson of ancient and modern history that the major socially destabilizing influence in many European and South American countries has been a highly politicized military. Complete and effective civilian control of the military would be compromised by participation of the military in the political process. The Supreme Court understood what we must remember. Once the military appears political, civilian control is compromised, public confidence evaporates, and history shows where that leads. And these are not bureaucratic niceties. Once the military becomes politicized, it loses the trust of the American people. A military seen as serving a political party cannot claim to serve the nation. For nearly 250 years, this principle has held. The American military has remained the most trusted institution precisely because it has stayed out of politics. Now, President Trump is systematically dismantling this bedrock principle, brazenly, repeatedly, and with apparent pride. On May 24th, he addressed West Point's graduating class while wearing a red MAGA hat, a political campaign symbol at a military ceremony. This was not an accident. It was a statement. He told our nation's future Army officers that his election victory gave him the right to, quote, do what we want to do. He told cadets about to take their oath to the Constitution that winning an election means you can do whatever you want. In June, at an event in Fort Bragg, President Trump made this politicization even more explicit. Soldiers attending the event were apparently screened for physical appearance and enthusiasm and were positioned in the bleachers as background props for what Trump boasted was a political rally. The troops were encouraged to boo his opponents, cheer his applause lines, and jeer the press. Almost as disturbing, President Trump's team brought vendors onto Fort Bragg to sell campaign merchandise to everyone, including soldiers in uniform. This was an explicit violation of long-standing Army regulations and Department of Defense policies. It exploited soldiers and the prestige of their service for the president's partisan and personal gain. And again, just last month at Quantico, Trump spoke to a hall of hundreds of generals and admirals to make explicit what had previously been unspoken. He complained about, quote, an enemy within, and told the assembled officers that dealing with this domestic enemy, quote, is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room. That's a war too. It's a war from within. Let us be clear about who Trump means when he says, quote, the enemy within. He does not mean terrorists or foreign agents. He means his political opponents. He means Americans exercising their constitutional rights to disagree with him. Indeed, any doubt about who he considers, quote, the enemy within was erased when he pardoned more than 1,500 people convicted of attacking Congress and Capitol Police on January 6, 2021. These are people who attacked the Capitol at President Trump's urging, who savagely beat police officers, who forced members of Congress to flee the chamber for their own lives. The vast majority of my colleagues were there that day and know exactly what they saw. These criminals who supported President Trump were rewarded with pardons, while those who he believes are opposed to him are being targeted for retribution. This is not a theoretical concern. The president went further in his remarks at Quantico, suggesting that he wants to use, quote, some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military. He proposed to deploy American troops in American cities to train for operations against American citizens, all without the consent of state and local leaders, and in very apparent violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. Already, we have seen him order deployments in Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Portland, and elsewhere. The pattern is unmistakable. Trump is attempting to transform the military from an apolitical institution that serves the Constitution into a political tool that serves him. He stages political rallies on military bases. He sells campaign merchandise to troops in uniform. He fires generals who give him professional military advice he doesn't like. He tells military leaders that their mission includes waging war on his domestic political opponents. This is not normal. This is not acceptable. And if my Republican colleagues don't publicly reject this behavior, the president will fundamentally alter the character of American civil-military relations. Beyond politicalization, President Trump has shown consistent disrespect for the military leaders and the values that they hold. At his West Point graduation speech, he claimed he defeated ISIS in 3 weeks. There's just one problem. It's not true. General Kane himself has refuted the story that President Trump repeatedly tells about that campaign, that he defeated ISIS. Indeed, in fact, according to the 2025 Intelligence Community Threat Assessment, which was prepared by the Trump administration itself, ISIS, quote, remains the world's largest Islamic terrorist organization. But the president stood before America's future military leaders and essentially lied to inflate his ego and his reputation. Trump also told West Point graduates, quote, "You do not need an officer corps of yes men," close quote. Yet he fired General Cruz, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, because the DIA's expert analyst contradicted Trump's claims about his military strikes on Iran. He has fired General C.Q. Brown, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, General Timothy Hawke, and many others in a purge of flag officers that appears motivated by race, gender, and political loyalty rather than merit. The message is clear. Give the president the advice he wants to hear or lose your job. President Trump disrespects not just military leaders, but also military customs and traditions. At the West Point graduation, he left before the diplomas were presented. He declined the opportunity to present the first and last cadets their diplomas, a tradition honored by presidents before him and hopefully future presidents. He couldn't be bothered to fully participate in a ceremony that meant everything to these young officers and their families. And earlier this month at Norfolk, at the Navy's 250th anniversary celebration, Trump dispensed with any pretense. He declared, quote, "Let's face it, this is a rally." He closed the ceremony by dancing to his campaign song, YMCA, by the Village People. The Navy's 250th anniversary became about Trump, not about the history of sacrifice of sailors and the service they represent. To my Republican colleagues who have served in uniform, you understand that service requires honesty, humility, respect for those who came before you. You know that officers must give their best professional advice, even if it's not what the commander-in-chief wants to hear. You know that when officers fear giving honest answers, people die, missions fail, wars are lost. So when the president lies about military operations, he disrespects every soldier who was told the truth about the battlefield. When he fires officers for honest advice, He disrespects every officer who has had the courage to speak truth to power. When he turns military ceremonies into political rallies, he disrespects every service member who has kept politics out of their professional life. You know this. The question is what you, all of us, will do about it. We are at a crossroads. The damage Trump is inflicting is not theoretical. It is happening now, and if we don't act, it will accelerate. America's civil-military relationships took 250 years to build, but it can be destroyed in a fraction of that time. Once the military is seen as a partisan instrument serving one party, once it is deployed domestically against political opponents, the trust that sustains it will evaporate, and that trust, once lost, can take generations to rebuild. Consider the dangers if this continues. Will military officers refuse to serve under future administrations, depending on the party in power? Will they resist civilian authority over policy disagreements? Will the military itself fracture along partisan lines? Consider what happens if Trump continues to deploy the National Guard against his political opponents. What happens when citizens see soldiers in the streets to suppress constitutionally permitted dissent? What happens to recruiting when young Americans view the military as a partisan tool? What happens to military cohesion when soldiers treat fellow citizens as enemies? And these are not hypothetical questions. President Trump told our most senior military leaders that fighting the, quote, enemy within is their mission. He suggested using American cities as training grounds. The precedent he sets will outlast his administration and be available to every president after. Congress has the constitutional authority and moral obligation to stop this. We are not powerless. We control the purse, although it appears so many times recently we want to surrender that control. We have oversight authority. We are not exercising it properly. We can pass legislation, and we must act. After 9 months of his presidency, it is clear that my Republican colleagues must do more than recognize the problem. They must act. Republicans must work with us to call out the president and take concrete legislative action. First, we must codify prohibitions on political activities at military installations and block federal funds from supporting such activities. No more campaign rallies on military bases, no more merchandise sales to troops in uniforms or civilian dependents or anyone else who wanders up. Second, we must pass legislation already in the Senate National Defense Authorization Act to require explanations and notifications for senior general and flag officer dismissals. If these decisions are based on merit, the administration should have no problem explaining them publicly. Third, we must strengthen the Hatch Act as it applies to political leaders interacting with military personnel. The rules that constrain service members from politics must also constrain politicians from exploiting service members for political purposes. And fourth, we must establish clear standards requiring congressional approval for domestic military deployments except in genuine emergencies. The founders gave Congress the power over the military for exactly this reason, to prevent any president from deploying troops as a personal force. I recognize the political pressures that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle face, but we all took the same oath, either in uniform or in elected office, to support and defend the Constitution, not a president or party. The American military is trusted by the American people because it has earned that trust by remaining apolitical, professional, and devoted to defending the Constitution of the United States. Mr. President, I'll close with this. Yesterday in Japan, President Trump boarded an aircraft carrier to address American sailors and Marines. For a full hour, standing before hundreds of young men and women deployed thousands of miles from home, the Commander-in-Chief lectured him on his political grievances. He complained that the 2020 election was stolen. He mocked reporters. He whined about the Nobel Peace Prize. He boasted about deploying the National Guard domestically. He invented false stories about President Biden and jeered him. The sailors and Marines, for their part, remained silent and respectful, like the professionals they are. But the name of that aircraft carrier is worth noting: the USS George Washington. How fitting that our first president set the standard for the military we inherit today, and how shameful that President Trump so badly failed that standard. Washington recognized that the presidency and the military are grander than any one person. And he recognized the danger of any man who believes otherwise. As he warned in his farewell address, quote, "Guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism." And President Trump, I fear that Washington's warning has come to bear. Simply put, President Trump is politicizing the military for his benefit. He is disrespecting our service members, and he is setting precedents that will haunt us for generations. Every day that passes, every political rally on a military base, every firing on an officer for honest advice, every statement about deploying troops against domestic opponents, each inflicts damage that becomes harder to repair. To my Republican colleagues, this is your moment. You can help defend the military you cherish, and indeed, you do cherish it. You've served it with distinction, honor, and courage. You can exercise your constitutional authority as the majority power, or you can stand by and concede to an executive who recognizes no limits. I suspect history will not forgive this body, all of us, for remaining silent while the president transforms this military into his personal political tool. The military I served in and my colleagues served in deserves better. The country we all swore to defend deserves better. And the young men and women taking the oath today deserve the apolitical, professional military our founders fought and died to establish. Let us together reassert Congress's power and preserve the military tradition we inherited. With that, Mr. President, I thank you and yield the floor. I would note the absence of quorum.
We'll call the roll.
Ms. Alsop-Brooks.